marketing. So that was a long answer, but hopefully I didn't ramble too much and you got the main idea.
Oh no, absolutely. That was great. We encourage rambling on PedChat. So
I found a good place for myself.
sounds good. I am here with Brandon Betancourt, who is the former practice administrator at Salud Pediatrics, does a good bit of consulting work for pediatric practices, running them well, and is a wizard in organizational behavior and HR for pediatric practices, speaking at several conferences coming up, doing some consulting. Brandon, how are you doing?
Good. Doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to start with a little bit of background here. So how did you come to be involved in pediatrics?
My wife is a pediatrician, and she decided to open up a practice in 2004. And at the time, I was in between jobs, and because of my business background, it made sense for me to help her get the practice up and running. And then the plan was that once that was all said and done, then I would go back to my corporate sort of consulting work. But 15 years later, I'm still kind of involved with the practice. It became apparent from the very beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing. Not that much has changed, but we knew that, that the practice would need a practice, like an office manager. But it became apparent for us, at least, that it was a little bit more complicated, and it required some administrative oversight. Constant administrative oversight. So the arrangement worked well because I was able to dedicate 100% of my time to running the business, because that's what it is. It is a business. And then my wife was able to dedicate 100% of her time to patient care.
What were, I guess, your biggest learnings coming from that business world and getting involved and being sort of new in pediatrics? What was the learning curve like there?
It was very steep. Because there was just a quick example. When we right before we opened, Joanna, my wife, she came home with a flyer for a coding seminar that they were going to be offering. So she's like, "Hey, I think we need to go to this thing. Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we went to the place, and as usual, we run late for things. So I dropped her off so she wouldn't be too late. Only one person would be late, which would be me. So I parked the car, and then when I arrived, the I guess you could call it, it was a class. The class had already started, and it was sponsored by the AAP. And I thought I had stumbled upon a class in a foreign language because they were just spitting out codes, numbers and codes and everything. And I started to get a little, worried and panicky because one thing I did know is that this was the way that the reimbursement worked. Like, this is how we were going to get paid. And so, but then I calmed myself down because at the time my wife had been out of residency, I'd say about 4 years. And so I'm like, well, no problem. I'm sure this is still fresh in her mind. Surely they teach this sort of thing in medical school and residency. I mean, after all, it's only their livelihood. It would be like, I don't know, training sailors, but not giving them a sail. I don't know. So that would be ridiculous for somebody to go out into the field and not know how to code. So I leaned over to her and I'm like, "Hey, are you getting any of this?" I don't hear anything. I don't hear anything back. So I turned to her and I look at her, and then the panic started setting in because her face was of complete confusion. and the response that I got was kind of. So I was just like, "Oh my goodness, we're in trouble." So with it, like, I think the 2 or 3 weeks later, I enrolled in the local community college with Coding 101. And so I did both of the coding lessons. So that just gives you a little glimpse of what our learning curve was.
What was sort of what were the distinctive, characteristics of Salud Pediatrics that you used to sort of create that image?
Well, one of the things that became apparent when I started looking into this and trying to figure out a way that we could market the practice is that it was very clear to me that we didn't really offer on the surface, there wasn't anything different that we offered that other pediatricians offered. And what I mean by that is that our Tylenol is no different than the Tylenol from the person down the street. Our vaccines are no different from the person down the street. So the only thing that really differentiates ourselves is us, the people, us. So we started working a lot on customer service, for example, and that was one of the values. We started working a lot on our values, our core values, our mission, our vision, and then part of that, our values, that the customer service, patient-centric, and understanding, kind of why people come to the office, for example. So I used to, I had a example that I gave my staff is that we are sort of like the lost baggage claim desk at the airport. Like nobody that comes to see us wants to see us. Even a wellness visit is not a pleasant experience. We take your clothes off, we poke you, you've got strangers looking at you. So even something that's normally good is not necessarily a great experience. Nobody really wants to be there. So we have to work, as opposed to going to a restaurant where you're like, oh yeah, they offer great food, I want to go there. Or the extreme is Disney, with the happiest place on earth. So Disney's already starting way up here as far as a customer satisfaction, if you will, even before they arrive. Where when people are approaching us, they're already, the mom might have not slept well the previous night, and they might have her and her husband might have gotten into a fight this morning because he's late for work, but the kid is having, he's sick and he can't take any more sick days. And so the mom, is left with the 3 kids. Anyways, and then so they're arriving at our office and we're like, good morning, how's it going? We're so glad to see you. And they're like, it's not a good morning. Anyway, so it was sort of understanding, understanding our strength and our weaknesses, understanding who we are as a practice, leveraging that, and then leveraging our exclusive uniqueness, which was ourselves, in order to offer a product that was a little bit, not really a product, but a service that was a little bit different than the ordinary practice.
So you've started touching on some things, and the reason why I was like, oh my goodness, I need to have you on PedChat when we first met is because I've found very quickly you're very passionate about organizational behavior, and it's something that I think a lot of pediatricians, practice administrators, and others can learn from. So for those in the group who don't know, what is organizational behavior and why is it important?
Yeah, good question. So if you look it up online, there's tons of different definitions for it. So, but the main one is it's the human side of business. And so it's not quite HR. A lot of people is like, oh, human resources, the organizational behavior, but it's really how people behave within an organization, hence the word organizational behavior. So it's the study of that. It's the discipline of studying how people behave within organizations. Ultimately, any service, it's about people. If you look at, if you do any sort of reading on Starbucks, for example, they'll tell you that they're not in the coffee business; they're in the people business. And there's other companies that will say that as well. That just Starbucks is the one that comes to mind. Yet we don't put hardly any effort whatsoever in developing our people, but we all agree that our employees are a company's most valuable asset, right? But then what are we doing to leverage that, or what are we doing to make our teams more effective? And the truth is very little. Experts will tell you, however, that is the last remaining competitive advantage. And this is kind of why I slid into this, because when I first started, I'm like, we are the people. We're the difference that's going to be the differentiator. And so experts will tell you that this organizational behavior and culture and so forth is the last competitive advantage, because things like finance or in our case EMR or technology, let's say our portals, what else? Accounting, accounts receivable, all the things that are what generally are defined as decision sciences. None of those things are going to make any significant progress in terms of differentiating yourself.
How many values do you have at Salute Pediatrics, and why did you choose those particular values?
So there are really three basic values, and then the values kind of have some characteristics that support that. So there are like additional adjectives, if you will, and descriptions, and we did that for several reasons. One was to kind of give a little bit more context to it, but at the same time, we also wanted it to be the very simple and basic so the employees can think about it. Because one of the mistakes that we made is that we had too many of them at the very beginning. That was one mistake. The other mistake, well, not really a mistake, but a realization is that some of them were true values and others were more aspirational. So when we evaluated it, we're like, you know what? This, we'd like to be like this, but this, we're not like this. So this is something we can strive to be, but it ain't one of our values. So then that got kind of set aside and put into another category. And then yeah, so there's three of them, but then they kind of, it's almost like a funnel.
Mm-hmm.
So you have three of them, and then they kind of open up to give descriptions, and they kind of expand a little bit more. So almost like what do you call those fans that they open up? You know, they're
yeah, the like Chinese fans.
Yeah, the Chinese things, you know, they're small and then they open up. That, you know, our values are like that. So there are three of them, but there's a lot of context for it. And again, to reiterate a little bit, is to be able to give it context and to go back to what I said earlier about measuring staff members. It's one thing to say, for example, one of it is very broad. It says carry the salute spirit. But what is it? What is the salute spirit? So then so basically it's kind of what Dr. B, the founder, my wife, what her kind of core principles are and how people define her. So she's, you know, very empathetic. She's very compassionate. And there's some other qualities that she has. So it's like, we want to embody that because that's why people come. Like we ask people, why do you come here? Like, oh, we love Dr. Betancourt because, you know, they would tell us. And then so those were the things that we grabbed. And we figured, you know what, that's the spirit. That's the very friendly, very compassionate, empathetic, and has that servant leadership quality. Everybody was like, oh, thank you so much. She's like, oh, I'm just doing my job. So kind of her approach to that is very, and also you know, with that servant leadership, there's humility and so forth. So anyway, that's why it kind of expands. But yeah, your question was how many do we have? It's three.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So so there's the salute spirit. Is friendliness its own, or is it one of the sub?
Friendly, it's part of the salute spirit. So it's friendliness. It's excellence. So that's the sub. The next one is going the extra mile. Mm-hmm. So that's basically, you know, like this is what is expected. Essentially, it's delivering whatever is not expected. So if this is what's expected, our goal is to deliver just a little bit more. And by the way, this is we don't just do this with our patients, but we've lately, and by lately I mean the last year or 2 years, late last year I would say, we've been focusing these values and saying, how are we going the extra mile for each other? And that's the other thing about the organizational behavior, how we're tying in the organizational behavior. Because you can argue that this value stuff, I mean, that's like business strategy, business planning, you know, that can kind of fall under, you know, SWOT analysis, all those fancy business terms. But then the way that we turn the corner to the organizational behavior is just like, okay, so are you carrying the salute spirit with your coworkers? And even us as the leadership team, you know, are we going the extra mile for you? And then the third one is no margin, no mission. When I mentioned that this is the last competitive advantage, I'm not minimizing the importance of still running finances.
Oh, yeah.
Accounting. I mean, all that is incredibly important. But the point, and another reason why this is, I think, to me, I'm fascinated about this topic is because the organizational behavior becomes the multiplier of all the other stuff. So a company that is well aligned, a company that is cohesive, a company that has the organizational behavior sort of disciplines in order, it's almost impossible for them to fail because they're able to work together to overcome any of the challenges that come along their way, which there will be. So I'm not saying that they're 100% proof of failure, but they have a better chance because they're well in tune. You know, they're working together. They're a team. Their guidelines are very clear. Their purpose is very clear. The values are clear. Just everything is just, you know, very crystal clear.